Great. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Distinguished participants, colleagues, partners, welcome to the webinar, National Adaptation Plans and Strategies in Theory and Practice, the role of the national and regional governments. My name is Vasileios Latinos, and I'm working for ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability at the Europe office in Germany. I'm coordinating ICLEI Europe's portfolio on climate change adaptation and urban resilience, and I'm also involved in the REGILIENCE project that is organizing this webinar. Thanks a lot for joining today's meeting. I'm sure we're going to have a very lively discussion. A couple of words maybe about the project that is organizing the webinar. So Resilience is a project funded by the EU Horizon 2020 program, which supports communities, regions, and cities in their efforts towards developing climate resilient pathways. The project facilitates the identification and also upscaling of the most promising and most up-to-date resilient solutions that are being developed and promoted in 3 other innovation action projects, which are the projects Arsinoe, Transformare, and Impetus, all funded under the same call of the EU Green Deal on resilient regions. And most importantly, also the project supports the replication of these resilience solutions in 10 vulnerable and low capacity regions in Europe. We expect actually that these 10 vulnerable regions will be selected in early 2023. The objective of these workshops is to assess how the EU and the national levels interplay, and also how they may define, how this interplay may define the success and failure of the green or the sustainability transition at local and regional levels. We want to look on how do the EU policies drive the necessary changes on the ground, and what we can learn from the process of drafting, implementation, and monitoring of national adaptation strategies from the various EU member states. We have invited a number of speakers who will help us understand this, and with their experience to explore similarities and differences in this overall approach and foster mutual learning on climate adaptation processes at the different levels of governance. We are going, of course, to hear from our speakers, and I will get to them in a moment. We will have some presentations, and then we will engage in a panel discussion. What we've heard from regions and cities lately in a number of events now in this post or living with COVID situation, that actually we finally meet with people again, that it is also very important in light of the adaptation mission to understand, and that's what we're going to try to do also through this webinar. What are the plans for additional support to Europe's most vulnerable regions? What is in the pipeline for regions to build resilience in the upcoming months and years? And how does this link to efforts for green and resilient recovery from COVID-19, but also beyond? But let me briefly guide you through the agenda of the webinar. While we hear from, just to say also, while we hear from the speakers, you can feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and then we can, of course, read them out. And also, if you can, please also indicate in the chat to whom you address your question, or alternatively, you can also raise your hand, and then we will spot that you did that, and we will unmute you, and then you can ask your question directly to any of the speakers. So looking into the agenda, we're gonna start now first with a presentation by Johannes Klumpers, who is a senior expert and the head of the Secretariat for Climate Adaptation Mission at DG CLIMA. Johannes will need to excuse himself just after the presentation, so we can take questions for him just immediately. Then we're gonna hear from Tom Lammers, who is the EU Affairs Advisor of the Green Metropolitan region of Arnhem and Nijmegen. And then we're going to move into Branka Pivčević Novak, who is the head of service for general climate protection policy at the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Croatia. So we're going to have actually one member state with us representing the national level. And then we're gonna hear from Christian Kidd, who is the head of adaptation program in the organization Adelphi. Then we're going to move into the panel discussion, and there we will be very pleased to hear as many questions from you as possible. So to start, I would pass on to Johannes. Johannes, please, the floor is yours.
Vasileios, thank you. No, that's Latinos, your first name, or is it? No, what is your first name?
Vasileios.
Vasileios, okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for the floor. So I will try to share the screen for my presentation. Should be this one. Do you see this now more or less
Yes.
full on your screen?
Yes, it's
very good. Thanks a lot. So I actually think that this is a very, very, very good meeting that you have put together. And I am actually really sorry that I'm not able to attend the full meeting. I would have liked to listen to the Croatian presentation, to Adelphi and the other speakers, because that would have been extremely helpful for me as well. But after having accepted this meeting for a reason that is beyond my control, a team building event was scheduled within DG CLIMA, and that is running now in parallel to this. And I cannot skip this for several hours, unfortunately, and that is why I am limited to this small time now, unfortunately. What I'm trying to do is to combine in my presentation a general picture of how we in the Commission will work with the national adaptation plans. And I also will give a couple of slides on the mission, although maybe most of you are aware of the mission. I mean, definitely the REGILIENCE colleagues are, but maybe some others not totally. So I will give a little bit of that, and I will then, the slides are not perfect for that purpose, but I will give orally some hints as how I see that interaction between the mission and the regions within the mission and those national adaptation plans. Okay, so I'll start off with a complicated slide, which is not mine, which I'm using for the first time, which is an animated slide, and that is always difficult if you don't know it by heart, but I'll try my best. So this gives an overview on the policy cycle around climate adaptation and what was done in the Commission. And in the past, there was this monitoring mechanism which led to actually an evaluation of the 13 adaptation strategy, had a preparedness country scoreboard, and was also preparing a report on national policies, which all fed into a later document called the EU Adaptation Strategy. But what also happened is that in 2018, the Energy Union Governance Regulation was adopted. And in that Energy Union Governance Regulation, there are certain reporting requirements on member states. Most of the aspects in that Energy Union governance, and that is not surprising, they deal with the Energy Union. So that's the main purpose of that governance regulation. And it has 2 articles that are about reporting, that is Article 17 and Article 19. The Article 17 is about the reporting about the energy and climate programs. And these energy and climate programs, they do not necessarily, so this is the national energy and climate programs, they do not necessarily need to include climate adaptation to climate change. They can, if it is relevant, to safeguard energy supply, energy efficiency, and so on, but they are not obliged to do so. But there is also another article in that energy union governance, and that is the Article 19, and that requires from all member states a report on national adaptation policy, and it requires the development of national adaptation plans. Then that is the Article 17 I was talking about. And what we also have in the full picture, so this slide will get very crowded at the end, is the adoption of the 2021 EU adaptation strategy, which foresees a number of actions, 14 top-level actions and quite a number of sub-level actions that are all aiming at promoting and bringing us forward with adaptation in Europe. One of the actions that is in that adaptation strategy is the mission on adaptation to climate change. There are a couple of other actions, and they all deal in, generally speaking, with accelerating transformation and with using to the best of our making optimal use of the knowledge on climate change and its impacts. Now this is the latest piece in this whole picture on the climate adaptation policy cycle is the climate law, which was adopted last year. And in that climate law, there is a novelty that feeds back a little bit on the Article 19 reporting obligation on the adaptation policies in the countries, because that climate law introduces a mandatory objective of continuous progress on adaptation to climate change for both EU and national level. And that means that in the future, the adaptation plans cannot just be adaptation plans like maybe they were in the past, but there is an obligation in the adaptation plan to also show how progress is achieved on adaptation to climate change. And I think that is quite important. It's almost, I'm tempted to say almost this corresponds to this Japanese concept. I think, what is it called? Kaizen or something like that, that is very cherished by Toyota and other on continuously improving what you are doing. And this is basically introduced through this climate law. These reports that are done by the member states, the first were delivered in 2021, and they are all can all be seen on Climate Adapt, all of those, and there's an assessment made of those also by the EEA, by the European Environment Agency, and this assessment is then also used by the Commission for an overall assessment of the national adaptation policies and the potential development of recommendations in the future. We are right now in the process, together with the member states, to develop guidelines on national adaptation strategies and national adaptation policies. This has been discussed now twice with the Council Working Group on Adaptation, and these guidelines are not finalized. But they are under development, and they will give, as the name says, guidance on these plans and strategies. Good. That was the overview on the total system. Quite complicated. And now I will give you a little bit of a glimpse on the mission. Now, I mean, many of you might know this, but the mission on adaptation to climate change is a new feature in the Commission, hasn't existed previously. It's an attempt to actually bring together efforts, both financially but also policy-wise, to help regions in Europe and municipalities to become climate resilient. That mission is, as I say, addressing regions and municipalities. And this is one of the key features of that mission. And why is that? It's because the Commission has identified, and actually it's no secret, the member states are also themselves very much aware of it, that many of the actions that need to be undertaken to actually reach climate resilience are under responsibility of municipalities or of regions, but there are obviously also certain responsibilities that are managed at the national level, of course, as well. And the national level always has, of course, a role in bringing their own regions within their country and helping them along reaching that resilience. But so we are having with the mission, we are addressing 3 objectives. And the first one is a better understanding of climate risks, help using all the knowledge to be better prepared. And that is something that in principle, we think as a principle, it should be available to all regions in Europe. And then we intend to work a little bit more closely with a subset of regions that are that are already quite aware of have a good understanding of what their risks is, have a good understanding what they need to prepare for. And those are, we intend to help with roadmaps, with developing pathways, with plans to reach climate resilience. And yet within that subset of regions, we believe that at least 75 of them, we hope, will enter into demonstrations of larger scale transformations that would show what it means and how it can be done, reaching resilience. So that's a little bit the principle. In that, we are looking at innovation areas, at making critical infrastructures resilient, at health and well-being, at land use and food systems, at water management. And within all of this, we are wanting to favor, as much as it is possible, nature-based solutions. They are not always the only solution, and they are often not the only factor, so they need sometimes to be combined with technical solutions. But as much as it is possible, we would like regions and municipalities to think of nature-based solutions and to see whether that can make the trick. We are also having these kind of more enabling areas like knowledge and data is extremely important, both for the impacts and also to measure and monitor what is taking place. The local economic systems are extremely important to take into account and to think of what the impact on them might be. There was yesterday an article about, I read by coincidence about Singapore, for example. So that's very far, but that shows a good example of a local economic system. Singapore is investing now very, very, very heavily in artificial meat, in cell-cultured meat, which they produce in their own city, instead of importing in the future chicken or other meat from the surrounding Malaysia. Country of Malaysia. That is an example which has a strong impact on the local economic system in the city of Singapore, because it produces meat artificially in laboratories on the one side, but it will put in unemployment all those that were importing chicken and all the other meat previously. So that is an example from somewhere else, but that is one of those examples. Tourism, there are a lot of things that come when it comes to the local economic systems. Great. Now, how will we support regions? We will do it in 2 ways. The first way is helping regions and encouraging regions to participate in Horizon Europe. So that is the research program. Within that research program, we are designing calls that are much more aiming at regions and helping regions to participate in them than what traditionally is done in previous framework programs. And the reason is we believe that research and innovation can help in designing, implementing measures, and can also obviously help monitoring implementation, for example. So research and innovation has several roles to play. We, in addition to that research aspect, innovation program, we will provide services by a mission implementation platform, where the call for this will come out within 10 days now. So it's a call for public procurement. It's a public procurement, in the beginning of July, you will see the call opened. a pre-notice on that has already been published. And in that mission implementation platform will provide further help, not much, but a little bit, a first entry point it will create for regions who would like to orient themselves. Good. Now this is just an example of how we facilitate access to regions, for regions to the research activities. You have these two first calls here, which are where in red it is written cascading funds. Now this is a specific mechanism that we have introduced into these first mission adaptation work program, where two organizations, two consortia will be set up. The first one to help regions with climate risk assessments, and the second one to help them with the development of adaptation plans. And those two consortia will sign a contract, a grant agreement with the Commission, but the regions don't need to sign the grant agreement with the Commission. They will be able to apply to calls that will be issued by these consortia, and they will come in the second case in the beginning of 2023, and for the risk assessment it will come a little bit later, because the risk assessment project will first work on a common methodology that will then need to be applied by all the regions that will participate in there. So the regions then, when they apply to this to these calls that come later, they will get a little bit of money, 100,000 euro, something like that, and they can then work with these consortia on risk assessments and on adaptation plans. And that is a administratively much easier procedure for regions. They only need to engage with a consortium. They don't need to engage, if they don't want to, across borders and so on. They can to work with that consortium only. And they don't sign a grant agreement with the Commission. We have opened also a mission charter that is to actually make to interest regions that are not used with Horizon Europe, that don't know about our calls, or they might in certain or in many cases actually know about our calls, but we also want to reach those that are not used to work with research framework program. And so we have developed a charter which basically repeats what the objectives of the mission are, and we are inviting regions to adhere to that charter, and that is done through filling in a survey, and then where you say what you are planning in your region, in your municipality, and whether you would like to work within the framework of the mission. There's no deadline for application. It is an open process so far, and we have announced the first signatories at the mission forum on 7th of June. Today we have 270 applications received in total. 118 of those have already been announced as signatories on June 7. In addition, and that is an important category which should not be forgotten, we have had ourselves in the beginning not really thought about that, so that's maybe our mistake that it was not really communicated so well. But we are also having now a category which we call Friends of the Mission. So these are actually organizations that are not territorial authorities, but that are helping those regions, those territorial authorities, those municipalities in their adaptation efforts. That can be research organizations, that can be NGOs, that can be companies also. 17 of those were announced also on June 7, and since then we have received more applications to become Friends of the Mission as well. This gives a first picture of the first signatories. You see it's not spread throughout all countries. And at that time of 7th of June, we had 19 member states represented. Today we have 22 member states represented with the other applications that came. And if I can make a plea to the colleague from Croatia who speaks later, still we do not have an application from Croatia today. So it would be very nice if there was the one or the other region from Croatia or municipality from Croatia who also signals interest to work with us in the mission. Yes, and I think here I end, and I might not have given all the pointers for how mission and adaptation strategies work together, but one last comment here is that I know that, for example, in Spain, they have, in addition to their national adaptation strategies, they also have broken that down into multi-annual work programs where they define about using the European programs and national programs and so on for their national adaptation strategies to implement it. And the Spanish are thinking of integrating the mission into their next multi-annual work program that would be part of implementing that Spanish national adaptation strategy. And that is something that we are very, very interested in also discussing with other member states, whether such a possibility exists, whether it makes sense, how it can be done, because we know that combining the different funding sources, and especially the funding that comes from different European programs, structural funds are very different in their mechanisms than Horizon Europe or LIFE. LIFE is another key program here. LIFE is easier for regions most of the time and cities than Horizon Europe, and we will integrate LIFE very much into our thinking as well. I myself have been becoming now responsible in CLIMA for the LIFE program to facilitate that integration of LIFE within the mission as well. And if that would see a reflection in future national adaptation plans, strategies, or programs, that would be lovely to see, and happy to discuss that. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Johannes. That was very informative, very interesting. Some of us are definitely also expecting, like I think many organizations that I see here in the participants list definitely have applied for some of the mission calls. So I'm sure that it's quite an exciting time also now ahead, like to find out which are the projects that will be funded and how actually we can all together, let's say, shape the work that will be done under the mission. There is a question in the chat that maybe I would like to take first immediately, and then I have also maybe one question for you. So we have a question from Jean-Sebastian Brock on that cooling might be relevant for both mitigation, energy efficiency, and adaptation. For example, to face heat waves, and should the cooling part of heating and cooling strategies developed by member states be part of their national adaptation plan? What is your view?
That my view generally is that this depends, of course, on every member state situation, but I know that cooling is part today already of certain national adaptation plans, and in both senses. Because cooling as a need for electricity production, for example, or for other infrastructures, there's cooling needs also for IT infrastructures, for many infrastructures, and there's cooling obviously against of buildings. So it is part in the thinking of a number of adaptation plans already today. And I absolutely agree that it can be a thinking that goes both with mitigation and adaptation, but it is absolutely, I think, normal to have this in national adaptation plans in those countries where heat is a major problem. And these are actually quite a number of countries in Europe.
Thank you. I mentioned also, Johannes, at the beginning in the opening that in the Resilience project, we aim to support 10 vulnerable regions in developing the climate resilience pathways. In the upcoming also like funding mechanism of under the mission, are there any more plans for additional support to Europe's most vulnerable regions, apart from applying for the cascading funding, and both in terms of also like not only funding but also in technical assistance?
Yeah, we are. You need to repeat it, Vasileios, later on if I am not totally getting your question. But we are planning every year, so both in the 2022 work program, which is out already, and then more pronounced even in the 2023, which will come out by the end of the year, quite a substantial amount of money for demonstrations. And these demonstrations will need to be carried out with regions. There will be in the consortium, there will be the need for having regions in there, but also there will be the requirement that you think about where potentially what you are demonstrating here might be able to be replicated. There will be regions need to be involved there immediately in those projects in the future. We have not yet planned again for other cascading calls than just those two that I've shown there.
Mm-hmm. One more question, because of course, yes, with this webinar, we talk about the national adaptation plans and strategies. How would you rate somehow the successful or not implementation of the national adaptation plans and strategies across the member states? And how do you do you see that actually these actions have been monitored well, and what actually the different member states need to do to step up their action somehow?
I do not think that I personally have yet the full picture, certainly not, but what we could see is that there was recently, over the last 12 months, most member states were developing their common agricultural policy strategy plans, which is another obligation under the common agricultural policy. Some of the member states, I remember Portugal, for example, was referring in their common agricultural strategy plans to their national adaptation strategy, and were saying that this and this action in the CAP strategic plan is required, is necessary, is in line with what we have foreseen in the national adaptation strategy. Then other countries I've seen, and I don't want to name the names here, who have not done so, who seem to have been totally agnostic of the existence of national adaptation plans when they were developing their CAP strategy plans. So there it varies. And I know that some countries do refer in their national energy and climate programs to adaptation, others do not. So also there it varies. And then there might be other planning which I am not aware, which we don't see so much at the European level, which is the spatial planning, which is very much a that is no European initiative. So every country has spatial planning, and that is very often at the regional, communal, municipal level. And I know for sure that because it pops up in newspapers sometimes, that there is frictions around these spatial plannings, where you have, I remember a case from Sweden, where a building area was newly established, and the insurers have said at that moment, that building area is far too close to the shore. We will not insure any of the houses that will be built there. So that pops up occasionally like that, and on that I have no clue whatsoever. So it will be very interesting to see the reporting by member states on these spatial planning aspects, for example, which we don't really see at our level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's also something that we are also like in ICLEI Europe, we deal with a lot. Like we try to see also how actually the reporting is taking place in the monitoring. There is one more question in the chat. I think yeah, it was quite interesting to see actually that slide with the cascading funding and with the different potential consortia. So Lisa Andrews is asking if you can explain a bit more about how the regions who apply for funding, I guess she means the cascading funding, would work with the research consortia, and how would the research consortia better prepare for collaborating with those regions to deliver the most impact. So so you mentioned like there will be like this smaller funding, like 100,000 euro around there, and then how actually then does the projects need, like, I guess, to create already the mechanism and then for collaboration, or how?
Yeah, well, the principle is that we give a grant agreement to a consortium that sets up a structure that itself then again issues calls, and by these calls invites regions to work with them on the topic of those two that we have dedicated to those two consortia. So in one case, it is about the risk assessments. And for this one, the consortia has first a homework to do before it invites the regions. And that homework is that consortia needs to develop a common methodology for climate risk assessments, and that will be applied throughout all of the assessments that in the second stage will be carried out with the regions. And once they have done this definition of the common methodology, there are many methodologies out there, so they will not invent the wheel again. They will just need to agree on which is the methodology we will use for all of those regions that will apply in the second stage. And once they have done that, they will issue a calls to regions in Europe. And I think in that particular call, the minimum is that they get at least 50 regions in. And they will then, and those 50 regions, they will get each between 100 and 300,000 euro. I think that's the maximum. If I recall correct, I'm not sure about that anymore, but that is written somewhere in the call text, I think. And then they will work with each of those regions to develop their regional risk assessment. In the second case, it's the call for working with the regions we expect to come out quite shortly after the grant agreement has been signed, because there is no homework for the adaptation plans. Basically, the consortium can more or less immediately start working with the applying regions to develop their adaptation pathways and strategies. So I expect they will already issue a call for regions in the first quarter of 2023, because we expect that grant to be signed before the end of the year. And then how that collaboration exactly works, that I don't know yet, because the evaluation of these calls, they are done. So we know that for each of these calls, there is a winning consortium and there will be a grant agreement. But I do not know yet in detail how exactly that winning consortium has proposed to do the interaction with the regions. And but they were in competition with other consortia. So the evaluators hopefully really have chosen the best consortium, and they will have chosen it also on the basis of the quality of how that consortium will interact with the regions and will help them.
Thank you.
I hope, Lisa, this is more or less helpful to your question.
Great. Yeah, I think that was quite interesting to hear, and we definitely look forward to also. It's good to hear that actually the evaluation is already done, so we look forward to hear the news soon.
I can imagine.
Great, thanks a lot, Johannes. I guess there's no more questions, so I think that we can release you, so you can also like have fun in the team building activities at DG CLIMA. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you again for the great initiative. It's a really good workshop, and I might well look into your registration later on, so to hear what Branka is saying and Christian and so on.
Great, thanks a lot. There will be also like a recording. There will be a recording, so you can also like refer to that. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks a lot.
Great. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Great. We can move on now, and we can already go to the next speaker. So now we're gonna have like the three presentations, one after the other, as I mentioned earlier, and then we're gonna move with the three speakers then into like a panel discussion where basically we can hear from all of them and we can get your questions. Again, please either write your questions in the chat or ask to be unmuted, and you can ask the question directly to any of the speakers. I would like to move on directly now then to Tom Klumpers. He's the EU Affairs Advisor at the Green Metropolitan Region, Arnhem-Nijmegen. And Tom, over to you. You can also share your screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vasileios. Thank you for having me. I start by sharing my presentation first. Hopefully that works just fine. Yes, it's visible, right? I hope, yes, perfect. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Tom. I work for the Arnhem-Nijmegen Green Metropolitan region and want to tell you a little bit about how climate planning in the Netherlands is structured, looking at it from the national, regional and local perspective, and also telling you a little bit about how we as a region, as a Green Metropolitan region, are actually involved in these strategies and are actually translating them into measures and actions. Let me start by first telling you a little bit about the region I work for, so you understand where we come from. The Arnhem-Nijmegen region is situated in the eastern part of the Netherlands. We're actually a border region bordering Germany. We have approximately 750,000 inhabitants, which you could call metropolitan on a Dutch scale. Two big cities being Nijmegen and Arnhem, which are both situated along a river. The river Rhine flows through Arnhem, the river Waal through Nijmegen, coming from Germany. And we have many nature reserves in the region, which is important to remember. There are many knowledge institutions in the region, universities of applied sciences, universities which are working on circular economy, climate adaptation, a lot of expertise we have in the region. We're lucky with that. And the region is strategically located on a European TEN-T corridor, which is the Rhine-Alpine one, which is also important to know when speaking about how the region is growing in the future. Now, when I say Green Metropolitan region, that basically is the cooperation between 18 municipalities in our region, the two cities, Arnhem and Nijmegen, being two of them. And we have an economic board that represents the knowledge institutions and enterprise in the region. So that's the triple helix model of cooperation we've adopted in our region for some years now. There's also an intensive partnership with the Food Valley region to the west of us, where the Wageningen University is situated. Wageningen, internationally famous also for their work on climate adaptation, biodiversity, etc. And we work together with the province of Gelderland. So in our region, there's already many stakeholders that are actively working together, and we do that with a regional strategy that's focusing on 5 topics, being circularity, productivity, connectivity, green growth, and leisure. And climate adaptation is actually a part of each of these 5 topics. So it's both when it comes to green growth, the building of construction of new houses, of course, is something where climate adaptation is integrated, but also in productivity, the growth of our economic clusters, etc. So climate adaptation is really an integral part of this regional strategy. Now, when it comes to the main challenge we're facing as a region, and it's not unique for our region in the Netherlands, many regions in the Netherlands are facing the same challenge, that is sustainable and green urbanization. For our region, we need to build 60,000 houses in the next decade, in the next 10 years. The region is growing. We need to accommodate a lot of new citizens in our region, and we want to do that in a circular, climate adaptive and nature inclusive way. But we're facing a complex backdrop, many transitions, of course, I think known to you as well. We face problems when it comes to nitrogen reduction. I do not know if it is in the international papers and on television, but we have a lot of farmer protests going on in the Netherlands at the moment due to the discussion of nitrogen reduction and the transformation of our agricultural sector, which is also influencing the way we can or cannot build new houses in the Netherlands. We, of course, face an energy transition going from natural gas use to other sources of energy. We face increasing problems with the quality of our soil and the fresh water supply, and also face increasingly long periods of droughts in the Netherlands as well. And we have a problem when it comes to the particular skill sets, the skills that are needed to face climate change, to adopt the circular economy, adopt climate adaptive measures in the Netherlands. We noticed in our region that although we have a lot of knowledge institutions, that a lot of organizations and stakeholders do not have the skill set to tackle these problems in the right way. So we need to invest in that social human capital side of things as well. Now, looking to the national level and where we as a region link to national strategies, we have in the Netherlands, when it comes to the national context, a large program which is called the Delta program. And this Delta program goes back actually to the 1950s, 1953, the big North Sea flood in the Netherlands that destroyed large parts of the province of Zeeland and South Holland as well. A big impact did it have for the Netherlands. And after that massive flooding, a special Delta Commission in the 50s was being installed, set with the task of preventing such floods in the future. Now, this Delta Commission resulted in their work and their efforts in the Delta Works, I think known to you, a large preventive structure, defensive structure along the Dutch coast, preventing flooding in the future, internationally known, I would say. And that is actually then the Delta program evolved to what it is nowadays. The current Delta program sets the long-term course in the Netherlands when it comes to 3 topics, being flood risk management, freshwater supply, and spatial adaptation. Now, these 3 programs, of course, it's not only focusing anymore on flood risk as it was in the 50s, but now we have these 3 topics that are combined in one long-term big strategy that we know in the Netherlands. Now, the Delta program in itself sets the long-term course for the Netherlands, but it's also divided into Delta decisions. And these Delta decisions are actually the, let's say the translation, the 6-year translation of these 3 different thematics and are evaluated each 6 years and provide actually the national framework for the mid-long term. Now, these Delta decisions on their part are translated into Delta plans. And in these Delta plans, we have described concrete measures for implementation of climate adaptive activities, actions, and measures. And now when I say national context, actually that's not correct, because this Delta program is not a top-down program. It's actually a cooperation between the national government in the Netherlands, the provinces we have 12 provinces in the Netherlands, the water authorities, which are mostly unique to the Netherlands. We have a kind of layer that's solely focusing on water management in the Netherlands. It's also cooperation with municipalities. There's support from knowledge institutions and enterprises. So basically, the Delta program in itself is already a multi-level governance instrument we have in the Netherlands on climate adaptation. And worth mentioning, we have also a special Delta commissioner. Currently, it's Mr. Peter Glas, who is overseeing the progress made with the Delta program. One topic that was also mentioned by Mr. Klumpers was spatial adaptation, and that's actually one of the important sub-programs within the Delta program that are actually very important for us as a region as well, because in this spatial adaptation program, we set out the spatial planning measures for the built-up environment, but also for rural areas in the Netherlands. And here we describe how we tackle increasing heat, which was mentioned in the chat as a question, heat stress, but also drought, severe precipitation, etc. Now, the spatial adaptation sub-program is also translated into a Delta decision, the first one being made in 2015. And in this Delta decision, also the joint ambition to make the Netherlands water resilient and climate proof by 2050 is being described. We're actually now already in the second cycle of this Delta decision on spatial adaptation. The first one being made in 2015, so we're 6 years ahead now. So we're working on the second Delta decision on spatial adaptation in the Netherlands at the moment. And this Delta decision, as said, is also translated into Delta plans with concrete actions where all of these stakeholders work on. Now, when it comes to strategies, also the European link, we do have to make it a little bit more complex in the Netherlands. Next to this large Delta program, also a national climate adaptation strategy, which is basically also the Dutch answer, Dutch translation to the EU adaptation strategy as well. So basically these two big programs, the Delta program and the national climate adaptation strategy, are providing us as regions and cities with long-term, but also with concrete measures and actions to work on. Now, how are these actions actually being translated into regions and cities? That is where we come a little bit more to the regional context in the Netherlands, because the Delta program is being worked on by 40 work regions in the Netherlands, and you see them on the map here on the screen. And these 40 work regions are consist of the provinces, of municipalities, of regions, of knowledge institutions, and together in these work regions, vulnerabilities to weather extremes are identified, but also these work regions work on stress tests and translating them to regional policies and take national measures on the regional level. And these regional activities are in itself translated and described in regional adaptation strategies. So again, another level of strategy and planning that we know in the Netherlands. To make it even a little bit more complex, these 40 work regions also work together with other work regions, so they're interlinking and exchanging as well. And you see that pointed out by the colors on the map. So we have the working regions in the Northern Netherlands working together, in the Eastern Netherlands, etc. The complexity is for us as a Green Metropolitan region that these work regions are mostly based on existing partnerships around the water chain. So they're basically based around water basins or on rivers that we know in the Netherlands, on water catchment areas. So these provided the basis for these work regions. And this resulted in the fact that we in the Green Metropolitan region have 7 climate adaptation work regions active. So it's really a complex situation of different actors that are interlinking on several levels, which is good when you want exchange and you want action on several levels, but it can be a little bit complex to explain, I would say, to people who are not used to the kind of Dutch polder way of cooperation we have known for the last years now. The regional context, so the work region, one of these work regions we know in the Arnhem-Nijmegen Green Metropolitan region is a region surrounding the city of Nijmegen. And they were actually one of the first work regions that started working on the Big Delta program and on the climate adaptation strategy in the Netherlands. It started in 2016, 2017, and they adopted their own regional adaptation plan in 2019 and 2020, the action plan, I must say. And this resulted already in large-scale projects. You can see the image here, where a large part of the river Waal that is flowing through the city along the city of Nijmegen was actually widened. The dikes were moved further away from the city to prevent flooding, but it also resulted in projects where you can see in the middle of the river there was an artificial island that was created, a river park where there is space for living, recreation, water and nature, actually combining all of the challenges we face: biodiversity, housing problem, recreation that's taking place there, but also the effects of climate change on the river itself. So these are examples of regional activities that resulted from the national and the national adaptation strategy and the Delta program on the regional level. Now, of course, we also do have the local level where activities are taking place. For example, Nijmegen, the city, was elected as EU Green Capital in 2018, and since then is working hard on local adaptation strategies as well, and currently are developing action plans for local climate adaptation. And they embed it into the way of working in the city itself, in the municipal organization. And here, it not so much goes about large-scale project, but mostly also about citizen awareness. So there I have the smaller scale projects. You see an example also on the image here, replacing unnecessary paving in streets, replacing it with greenery. So these are local actions that are connected to the regional and the national level. So you have all kinds of different scale projects and activities going on that are all interlinked with each other. Some closing remarks on that. As mentioned, the national, regional, and local context in the Netherlands cannot be separated. They need to be viewed as a whole. That would be my main message here. When you look at the way and the importance of this interaction, it is several ways. It's a financial advantage we have. There are large-scale funding provided on the national level. We have the Delta Fund with billions of euros for co-financing initiatives in the 40 work regions that are defined in the Netherlands. Also from the national level, there is support when it comes to creating living labs, support via expertise, knowledge, and also when it comes to policy making and policy changing in the Netherlands. There are several knowledge platforms that are also linked to the Delta program and the National Adaptation Strategy. We have innovation programs for enterprises, but also the OSCA, which is mentioned here on the slide, which is creating standards for the construction sector when it comes to climate adaptive buildings. So different kinds of platforms where in the Netherlands we can exchange between each other. And for the municipal and the public and the government side of things, we have also an association of Dutch municipalities where climate adaptation is put on the agenda. We have the 40 large cities in the Netherlands that are discussing climate adaptation. And we, as an Arnhem-Nijmegen Green Metropolitan region, are also putting it on the agenda. So basically, and that would be my closing remark, is that it's actually a kind of a unique way in which we in the Netherlands work on all these kinds of different levels, but it's also making a really complex map of different stakeholders involved, which is not so easy to look through sometimes, especially when you need to explain this, let's say, to my neighbor, to citizens. How do we tackle this? It's really a complex system of things, and the challenge being for us to explain and to translate this into easy language, I would say, which is not always that easy. Yeah, I think that would be it for now from my side, and of course happy to answer questions during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom. That was very interesting. It was very good to see also how the different levels interplay. You definitely have a big challenge adapting to climate change while building 60,000 houses. It's like quite a big challenge. So I would like to move directly to the next speaker, and then we will come back to you in the panel discussion. Our next speaker is Mrs. Branka Pivčević Novak. She's the head of service for the General Climate Protection Policy at the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development in Croatia, and she will give us insights on the Croatian National Adaptation Plan. So, Branka, over to you. You can share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasileios, and thank to all these previous speakers. Very interesting to hear all this. Although I'm for years working on the adaptation issue and how complex the subject is, I think I know. But yeah, I have the very important role of being part of the governmental level to set the frame to drive the necessary changes on the ground, and everybody expecting so much from the governmental level. So it's not so easy to satisfy all demands. So I will share my presentation. Just a short one, just to help me. Okay, so let's see.
We don't see it yet. There.
Can you see it now?
If you can just put it on full screen, it would be great.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Is that right? Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'm actually from this Directorate for Climate Activities. It's a small group of people working on adaptation issues. And thank you all for giving me opportunity to join this workshop today. And well, I will in my presentation, as you have said, share my what the ministry is working on, and what is situation in Croatia. I would like to what I see from my point of view. So definitely when we talk about adaptation to climate change, how this started and what was the attention in Croatia regarding this topic, it started, I could say, from definitely with the Paris Agreement that gave a great push to climate change issues in the media, and more talking about climate change were present in Croatia. However, Croatia, as a part of the UNFCCC from 1996, is obliged to deliver reports and communications. And ministry, as a national governmental level, was in charge of drafting those reports with the help of the I can say little group of experts that help us to do so. So also important thing for the having attention on climate change and adaptation to climate change came from the EU level. The previous EU strategy, adaptation to climate change, EU one, and the new one are also having more attention in not only in my ministry, but also in the other sector policies. While also this, you heard in the first presentation, there's a certain obligation of drafting the reports on national climate change adaptations and planning and strategies, and ministry was coordinating that and engaged more experts and local authorities to join this reporting cycle. What is very important, because this reporting thing is having two ways of communicating, also showing the locals of their obligations, and actually giving us the opportunity to communicate more directly on certain issues with the locals. Also important push for adaptation to climate change is identified in the fundings, especially the EU fundings, which very clearly highlight that they are funding climate issues, climate projects. I must say that we have recently a lot of Interreg projects on topic of the adaptation to climate change. The LIFE also projects are also used to work on the local level on adaptation issue, according to my knowledge. So I also find very interesting for Croatia that a lot of local and regional governments identified Covenant of Mayors as a tool, important tool. So I think there's about 88 signatures from local authorities, and actually they made commitments that they will develop sustainable energy and climate action plans. So more and more more visibility of this topic, and in Croatia we can see also. So on the national level, we can also see that we managed to make a push for adaptation to climate change by adoption of the national National Act. It's called Climate Change and Ozone Layer Protection Act. In 2019 as a separate act, And that act defines responsibilities, implementing documents, as well as the relevant sectors that should be included and that they're exposed to climate change. So based on that act, National Adaptation Strategy, the first one, was adopted by the Croatian Parliament in 2020. And what is important in this act, it requires the alignment of all other developing documents of individual sectors with the guidelines, basic goals, priorities, and measures set out at the National Adaptation Strategy. Also, it sets this act, according to the act, local and regional authorities are obliged to develop local and regional programs for climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and the protection of the ozone layer, which is a part of the environmental protection programs. So the bigger program, which should be adopted by the local and regional authorities. Also, we have this, based on this act, there is a Croatian committee for intersectoral coordination for policies and measures for mitigation and adaptation to climate change, which are part of the high-level governmental decision makers, and also the experts that that had to work on harmonizing the climate change issues and goals in all documents and programs. Also, very important thing, more recently, we are seeing this do not significant harm principle with 6 environmental objectives. Among them, one of the objectives is adaptation to climate change. We see this principle very important, especially for this financing process. So actually, everybody now, more and more people are asking about what is acceptable to be as an adaptation to climate change. Acceptable activities. So this is what is going on now. And yeah, regarding the question of building national consensus while drafting the National Adaptation Strategy, well, process started in 2016 and lasted for several years. That process included a strategic environmental assessment process, and we as a ministry, we had this big project, and we tried to include all kinds of different experts from the Croatia, from the universities and institutes, from national level governance, local and regional governance, civil sector, journalists and media, general public. We had a number of meetings and workshops around the Croatia to discuss climate change and the possibilities of adaptation to climate change and threats that Croatia is faced with. Based on that project, we established a national web page that is dedicated to adaptation to climate change in Croatia, to communicate these different these actions that are going on in Croatia, trying to make a national hub like this one on the EU level, but this is on the Croatian in Croatian language and for the Croatian fora. While working not only on the strategy, but also based on our work on the implementation of our strategy, we faced a number of challenges, challenges that actually highlighted also in the new EU strategy, and we definitely realized that we need smarter, faster, more systemic adaptation. And this is actually, we already in 2017 identified three horizontal measures that actually are going into that direction or to prepare the country to be more smarter, fast and systematic in approaching adaptation to climate change. So these are horizontal measures we are working on as a priority measures, which are very important for all other sectors and national and also the local level. So based on, actually we can group the actions we are working on, actions that are focused on experts and scientists. And one type of actions and measures we are working are focused on the local and regional governance. And third group of activities are focused on the public and public awareness activities. So in this my few slides, I will just share with you what we as a ministry are doing, what activities we have, and what are our plans. So as I said, and it was said previously, mainstreaming climate change issues, climate resilience considerations in other sectors, in other policies are very important. We as a ministry and my directorate is actually the everyday work. All different documents before they are adopted by the government or the parliament goes through our hands, and we are trying to force sectors to refer to the national adaptation strategy, to mention it, to make reference to that. Also, a lot of activities we do on integrating climate change issues in the strategic environmental assessment process in the documents that we receive on the national level, so documents from the regional level. That is very many, yeah. But also, but based on these activities with the CLEI and EAA process, we drafted national guidance how to integrate climate change issues into the CLEI and EAA process, and we will to harmonize the process, because we see very different experts understand the climate change issues, and they address it very differently in different documents. So we wanted to harmonize the process, and we will soon make some actions to communicate this national guidance to the experts and different consultants that actually local and regional governments are relying on their expertise. And we think that is very important to communicate with them. Also, it will communicate this national guidance with the local and regional governments and make some kind of discussion with them. How do they see that? Process of using strategic environmental assessment and environmental impact assessment as a process to take climate change considerations into the documents in the planning process. Very important thing, we are working on the modernization of the National Meteorological Network. There's one big national project on that to get better data, and user-friendly data that we can rely on and work maybe more precisely when working on our plans. Also, we had we will have 2 cycles of funding apply research for adaptation to climate change solutions. It's a national program. Through this program, we're trying to work with experts, with the scientific community, to bring them closer to deliver solutions for the adaptation to climate change to the local governments and national governments, of course. So we are going to make a conference with the locals and the scientists and the experts to share this knowledge and to see how to go on with the new program, what's good and what's bad about this program that will finish next year. So we will stimulate conversation on that also. We also managed to make a public call named for local and regional governance to finance development of certain programs related to the adaptation to climate change, to stimulate from our national level to stimulate production of those documents based on very qualitative and quantitative data from the monitoring, assessment, and vulnerability and risk of climate change. At the moment, we are working on the. We found out that the knowledge and about impacts of climate change and adaptation possibilities are not on a high level. So we started with one pilot education program. One component of that education program will be made for the regional level. Another one in more details for general experts and civil servants on local level to inform them about the policies, about where to get the information, and all other a need for the adaptation to climate change and all other aspects of it. And when we will be satisfied with the education program, we will make it a national project, including trying to educate climate officers that will be, in a way, support for the local, regional, local governance, educated special people who will work with the locals and and help to bring adaptation to climate change in real life. And final thing we were thinking about, it's definitely we as a ministry, we are lacking of our capacities and competencies, of course, and we definitely would need, as a on the national level, a center, an expert body that will be more flexible in giving support on implementation of a national adaptation strategy. And we have the plan to establish it, and we will see how decision makers on higher level will look at it. So, thank you for now. And this is these are my this is the web page of the national web page Prilagodba CLIMA related to the adaptation to climate change. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Branka. Definitely, I think it's also quite interesting to see how actually the Croatia is mainstreaming adaptation and with quite a number of activities. We will come back to you. Just being a bit conscious of the time, I would like to move directly to the next speaker, last but not least. We have Christian Kind, head of the program adaptation in Adelphi. So Christian, over to you. You can share your screen. Yeah, already. Thank you.
Thanks, Vasileios. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be part of this panel and play a role in learning across countries in Europe about climate change adaptation, including regions and cities. And I'll talk a bit about efforts in Germany on monitoring what's going on evaluating what's going on, with a special view on what role do regions and cities play, what role they've played in the past, what role they'll play in the future in designing national adaptation actions. Bit of background about Adelphi. We're an applied research institute. We are not public officials. We've done some research work on adaptation in Germany. We've done some consultancy work for both the German government, for regions, and also from cities. So I'm speaking here as an observer who has seen different processes, but everything I present here is my own opinion and based on the project work of the last 10 years we did. And also happy to say that we're part of the REGILIENCE project that is setting up this event today. I'll start with a bit of context on the German national adaptation process, try to be brief with this, and then go a bit into the inputs that regions and cities have given into this process and look at the outcomes. What have they received? How have they benefited from the national adaptation process? And then I'll conclude with some observations. Also starting with a timeline a bit less complex than what we saw earlier. 2008, Germany published its adaptation strategy among one of the first countries in Europe. Very general strategic document that was then backed up by an interministerial working group on adaptation on the national level, where on a regular basis ministries come together to talk about the implementation of the strategy. And then a horizontal body was established as well, a body where the Ministry of the Environment frequently interacts with representatives of the 16 federal states that we have in Germany to coordinate national action with federal action on adaptation. In 2011, Germany, the national government published an adaptation action plan. You might also call that a multi-annual work program where the different ministries said these are the things that we will implement on adaptation. And then in 2015, there was a monitoring report published by the government that looked at the impact, monitoring impacts of climate change, but also looked at monitoring adaptation efforts, what has been done so far. A vulnerability analysis was published where the government talked about its conclusions on climate risks and vulnerability across Germany. And then a second adaptation action plan was published as well. And then in the two most recent years, 2019 to 2021, an evaluation of the German adaptation strategy was done. Adelphi was part of the consortium that was doing this to look at what have we achieved in the past 10, 12 years of adaptation policy work in Germany. And another monitoring report and vulnerability or climate risk assessment was published, and a third adaptation action plan. So you see there's a cycle of multi-annual work programs, monitoring what's going on, checking vulnerability, how is it going to develop in the future, and now there's the evaluation component as well. And this is the cycle that's that will repeat itself after 4 or 5 years. So that's the general setup, and you've heard me talk a lot about the national level and the federal states, because Germany has a federal system where really the cities and regions interact with the federal states, and then the national government mostly interacts with the federal states. So the inputs of regions and cities into the national process were, I would say they were regular, but it wasn't an intense or somehow formalized process. But the national government regularly sent surveys, as we all like to do, to cities and regions to find out where the needs are, where barriers lie in adaptation work. The national level frequently has conferences where local actors present their work and get involved and network together. Then just now and then we saw some position papers of city associations where cities or city networks came together, German city networks came together and said, this is our position, this is what we think should happen, and started to lobby for this, but really more on a low intensity level. And then in all evaluation efforts, when the strategy was evaluated or funding programs were evaluated, cities had a voice there via interviews and surveys as well. So that's what went in. What were the outputs for regions and cities? Also roughly structured along a timeline. In the early years, the national government provided some tools, guidance. How do you develop a local adaptation strategy, events for networking, connecting cities. Then 2014, 2015, there was a funding stream for cities to get some co-funding for developing a climate strategy that touches on adaptation as well, mitigation and adaptation. But that was competitive funding where cities had to apply. Then there was some regulatory changes for, we already talked about that, spatial planning. The spatial planning laws were changed that made it a bit, in a way that now makes it a bit easier to account for climate change in planning processes. But it's not mandatory yet. And if cities do not want to do it, really, there's a lot of loopholes where you can say, okay, this is not a priority. We'll focus on building 60,000 houses or engaging in social housing. Funding for research projects also picked up, much like on European level. Larger research consortia involved cities, and cities also got a bit of funding to work on this. Then in most recent years, the federal states started to provide municipalities and regions with funding to develop heavy rain risk maps to learn more about if there's a heavy rain event, where will the water go? This was very well received. And finally, after a lot of lobbying from different sides, the main investment vehicle for public investments into cities, the German Städtebauförderung, now has a funding stream for adaptation and blue-green infrastructure. And this is really a very large funding program that will have strong impact in the future. And then most recently, a funding stream was opened up for funding climate adaptation managers. So people in municipalities or regions that focus solely on climate adaptation and that are being funded for 2 or 3 years. And last summer, an activity that Adelphi is also involved in, the German Environmental Ministry launched the Center for Climate Adaptation, a website and consultancy institution where municipalities can call every day and get advice via telephone. We have regular webinars, we have conferences, we have educational webinars and trainings for these climate adaptation managers. And it's really meant as an institution that is not project-based, but that hopefully will be there for a longer time to provide support to municipalities and regions. What impact or what were outcomes maybe of what we've talked about so far? Here now focusing on large German cities, so cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants. We can see that now 55% of these cities in Germany have a strategy that touches on adaptation, so either a holistic climate strategy or a climate adaptation strategy. And a lot of these strategies were funded or co-funded with national funding. And a lot of these strategies also take the national adaptation strategy as a reference point. So in interviews as well, while evaluating the German national adaptation strategy, municipalities and regions said, while it's a very general national strategy, it was important as a sign for decision makers on a local level that in the policy arena, something is changing and adaptation is an important topic. And that was an important motivation for developing activities and strategies on a local level. The topic of heavy rain events has become more pressing, and we can also see that now around 30% of large German cities have a strategy or a map that covers heavy rain events. And again, we can see that majority of them was co-funded, but now more from the federal states, not from the national level. What can we draw from this? As Johannes said in the beginning, of course, the municipal or regional level is very essential for adaptation. Really, a lot of things have to happen on the ground. And the EU level is a bit removed from this. The national levels are a bit removed from this. And I feel in Germany, in the context of the federal state, it worked well to include cities in the process, to keep asking for their opinions, for their needs, and municipalities did well to formulate their needs, which mostly focused really on funding for staff members and clear mandates, legal and political, to engage with the topic of adaptation. But I think throughout the years, one can see that these needs were only addressed bit by bit. For example, Germany had a national, of two, as I mentioned, two national vulnerability analyses that were very helpful for the national level. But when municipalities looked at this, some were a bit disappointed because the scale of the assessment was not really useful for the local level. So they felt they could have benefited more from what was done on a national level. It took a while to address this, but now I think 2 weeks ago, the German government published guidelines that help municipalities and regions to do these risk assessments themselves. And the government is also working on establishing a national climate risk map or registry that will hopefully be even more helpful for municipalities and take a bit of work away from them to repeat all these exercises on a local level. Barriers, of course, I mentioned the federal system and the needs. The federal system also has some advantages because the federal states can really respond to the needs in their regions. But from the national, looking down from the national level, you're facing a large variety of needs. And then we also have to say that adaptation is competing with other topics like social housing, for example, affordable housing, use of space in large cities for different purposes. And we can see these competing interests on a national level, but also on a local level, which makes it difficult for adaptation to advance as a topic if there's no clear requirement to do so. What worked well so far, I would say, but what is really important is to provide funding for staff in municipalities and really not like 50%, but 100%. So you can find good people who work full-time on this, and not for a year or two, but a longer time frame to really get into the structures of the municipalities. Funding investments, really putting money into infrastructure on a local level, providing data is very important, I think. If all the municipalities analyze satellite data by themselves, this is very time intense, and there's a lot of economies of scale if you just provide a cluster of municipalities with the data that they all need. And what we've seen in recent years also with the Center on Climate Adaptation, that connecting municipalities and people who work there on eye level, connecting them with each other and facilitating exchange with them on what works and what doesn't work is really well received. So far, that's a brief overview from me. Hope I could catch up a bit in the time, Vasileios.
Yes, thanks a lot, Christian. No, I think it was very interesting, and I think you were almost on time. So we were just like a little bit late, but it's fine. We have like enough time now for the panel discussion. I guess now I'm asking my colleagues from the Resilience Project. I guess we can bring all the speakers together. I'm not sure But anyway, don't mind my teams. Oh yeah, now I see all of them. Okay, that's great. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat. And to start, maybe actually to start with Christian. No, you're not off the hook. So you mentioned a lot about the efforts. It was actually quite good to see what's happening in Germany, following the example from Croatia. So you mentioned a lot about what actually larger cities are doing and their adaptation efforts in general in the different federal states. But what is the situation there with the small smaller or the medium-sized cities? And how does it look like in Germany?
Yeah, it's always easy to present findings about larger cities because they're more easy to count. We have 76 cities in Germany with more than 100,000 inhabitants, but if you count all the municipalities in Germany, it's over 10,000, so it gets very difficult to get an overview. But looking at smaller cities, or in interviews we did for different projects, really it's capacity problems. Larger cities can have a whole unit on environmental issues, maybe even have an in-house meteorologist, have good data sets, and also good skills in acquiring funding. And this is all very helpful. And many smaller municipalities do not have that. So the progress there is a lot, it's more difficult to monitor for us, but from what we can see, the progress is a lot slower. If you have a very engaged person who's well connected, then things can happen really fast, and you can see changes very quickly. So that's the upside of smaller institutions. And there's a couple of very good examples on this, but in general, progress is a lot slower. And as I said earlier, really, I think the key is, and it's happening in Germany already, to connect smaller cities or connect maybe the city of Hanover, for example, a larger city in Germany, has many smaller towns around it, and they're connecting a lot, sharing data, developing a common plan for the metropolitan area. And I think this is happening. I can see Tom nodding, happening in other metropolitan regions as well across Europe.
It is also like important, not for if you get like the right person that they're very engaged, that they also have like some influence, though, no? It's not only about engagement, but also like who they can reach out to and how they can basically influence the decision making. Moving to Tom, actually, yes, I see also Tom that you are like nodding. And how can you, if you could maybe highlight some of the experiences that you had? You mentioned in your presentation quite a number of activities there, and you connected also like the different levels of governance quite well and the activities in the different levels. But if you have some examples basically that can be considered as like really good practices that can be like replicable to other regions across the EU. So maybe we had, of course, two examples here, Croatia and Germany, but also beyond these two. And can you think of any learnings from challenges or failure, basically, that they should avoid?
Yeah, basically, well, I was nodding because it's very recognizable what you, Christian, also described, because that's basically what we face in our region, which is called the metropolitan region Arnhem-Nijmegen. Arnhem-Nijmegen being the two cities, but we have 16 smaller municipalities as well. So we face also the problem that progress on climate adaptation there is slower. The advantage of these work regions I presented in the presentation is that these actually are, let's say, very various kind of cooperation. So you see that in these work regions, a province with a city or two smaller towns and a water authority are working together for their specific part of the region, maybe because they're located along a river, or they have other kinds of problem with soil, or that they're working on this topic, and that the smaller municipalities or smaller organizations with less capacity are being taken along by the bigger ones, let's say. So it's actually you see that in across the Netherlands in these work regions, that this model somehow works, because it translates the big long perspective, long-term planning of this big Delta program, which is basically for small municipalities with, let's say, 20,000 inhabitants, basically a very high strategical thing, which is really difficult to translate into local practice. But through these work regions, it works, because also in these work regions, the implementation of the climate adaptive measures is not only on the big scale, like big housing projects or like with the river restructuring project, but also on the same agenda are these local initiatives like these greenery, pavement kinds of initiatives where citizens are involved. So that's, I think, very positive on the one hand. On the other hand, you see that especially when it comes to citizen involvement, that it's really sometimes a very technical and strategic approach, and it's very like engineered, and that it's difficult to get citizen involvement prioritized. So I would say that's something where we need to focus on very much in the next years, and that's also where we try to connect with other European partners as well, learning from their experiences. So it's two sides of the medal, I think. Yeah, the coin.
I see in the chat, actually, I see in the participants list quite some participants from Greece and Portugal. So maybe it would be also good to hear maybe in the chat if they would also see any of the examples that have been presented today, also working in their country context. Moving to Branka, you presented, you showed us in your presentation basically how the whole process was for the development of the National Adaptation Plan of Croatia. So basically, in your experience, you basically hinted already on that, but I would like to hear a bit more. How difficult was to achieve the consensus for the need of climate adaptation action, and now also even more now for mainstreaming adaptation into traditional planning, and how basically what were the arguments that the national and the regional level had basically to get the general opinion towards this need for more adaptation? So how did you manage?
Yeah, it was, well, actually, we started with a really big project in 17, and well, among people, there were a lot of actually skepticism about climate change at that time. But luckily, we involved our colleagues from the experts from the National Meteorological Service and the experts for the climate change, and they made climate projections for Croatia in 2 scenarios and 2 time frames and 2 resolutions. So actually, we got the data for the climate change for the Croatia, and then we made these workshops with different stakeholders all around the country, and we showed them the results, and we actually made a simulation what will happen in different sectors. So let's see what can happen. Then while discussing this at that time, actually, people are more involved in the process. So so actually the skepticism was out and more engagement was in, because everybody more and more realized that it's about their lives at the moment. This today, it's not something that will happen in far away from now on. So that was my experience from that time. Unfortunately, I wish I could, repeat every year that kind of workshops and simulations with the different stakeholders all around the country. We have lack of capacities, and that's our major problem, not only on the national level, but I assume also on the local level. So actually, we need each other and to work together. And as I said in my presentation, we need more scientists from Croatia to be involved in the process. We need them. So interesting, when the National Adaptation Strategy was adopted, first sectoral workshop we made with the physical planners, because we understood that they have the very, very important role. I must say that during the years, reference to the national adaptation strategy and risk assessment, and climate modeling, results of the climate modeling, which actually we have in the strategy, more and more national sectoral documents are referring to that. So, you know, that small work, what is going on the ground is through the environmental impact assessment process in everyday documents. And I think that is a very important instrument that can bring the change on the ground. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Branka. So, looking back into what we discussed before, so basically it seems that in Croatia, for the development of the national adaptation strategy, you, at least at that stage, you identified actually the right people and the ones that could influence basically like the development of the strategy. Do you see, though, that of course now the Commission is promising a lot with the mission, so there will be like more funding coming up, especially also like for regions. But do you see in general that sufficient resources have been dedicated so far to climate action in Croatia, also like through the Recovery and Resilience Fund, for example, now for the COVID recovery, for the different structural funds, and do you see basically that mitigation is still the main focus, or that now there is also like a shift towards adaptation, resilience, and disaster risk reduction also?
Well, yeah, traditionally mitigation to climate change is urging issue, and it's almost everywhere in the media, in all different forums. People are talking about mitigation, and it's about actually talking about the new technologies, everything, but it's very interesting to see, to listen, easy to communicate through media. So it's, yeah, it's easier topic. Adaptation to climate change is something, oh my God, it's very hard work on the ground behind this, not the lights of the screen. It's not about having faster electric car or something like that, going to the, you know, that kind of very, very attractive topics. It's about working hard, as I said, behind the screen, and actually it's about sustainable development concept, putting in a life finally. So yeah, this we have to make it more attractive. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, climate change is so you know, so visible these days recently. So yeah, this is
in different forms.
Definitely, yeah, in different forms that can help us to communicate also the adaptation issue, yeah, more easily to the public. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Christian has his hand up.
If it's allowed to ask questions, and if we don't
have
of course, any more pressing questions, I have a question to Tom. Tom, you mentioned the stress tests of cities or regions that they undergo. That sounded very interesting, and I feel like it connects very well to what Johannes said earlier about developing a methodology that will be applied on risk assessments. Could you talk a bit more about what these stress tests look like, and if there's a common methodology behind it?
And not really a common methodology. It's basically also what, again, is implemented in the regional adaptation strategies for these work regions. So you have the translation from these delta plans into the regions, and on the regional level, these stress tests are being done, basically in cooperation between mostly our provinces and the water authorities we have in the Netherlands. So they are basically also doing a lot of the monitoring and the measurements when it comes to that. And what's interesting is that it's also, because we are a border region, in our region, sometimes it's together with German partners as well. So we do that in a cross-border way. I must say I'm not the expert on that, but could provide you with some more information on that. But it's mostly linked to the regional level again. Yeah, and then of course it's also because we have feedback loops between the work regions and the national level. So the representatives from these work regions then also reflect and give feedback based on these stress tests to the national level, so it can be implemented in these delta decisions I mentioned, which are evaluated every 6 years. So basically there's a loop of exchange between these levels.
If I can also ask something, Tom, of course, in the mission now, we talk a lot about this systemic transformation, about like the regions developing like these climate resilient pathways, and basically, which means also like involving with resilience being like the umbrella topic there, but also like with involving, of course, like different sectors. How has been the process on the one hand in the Delta program, but also like in general, like in the adaptation work that is happening in the region of Arnhem-Nijmegen? Do you follow like the systemic approach, like looking into like this multifaceted transformation towards resilience, or like more kind of you have like a more kind of reactive approach based on what is happening on the disasters or that are taking place, for example?
Yeah. Well, starting with the Delta program first, it was basically a large. Well, when in the 50s, it was a reaction to the flooding. So the Delta Commission, the Delta works that were being constructed, was one big reaction to this disaster that happened in the Netherlands. Afterwards, of course, we shifted when it comes to flood protection, high water levels, more to a kind of planning, long-term systemic approach. So it was less reactive, I would say. So that part of the Delta program that we know now is still, I wouldn't say that is that much reactive. Although the project with the Waal River in Nijmegen, which I showed, was also again a reaction to the flooding in I believe in the 90s it was, when large parts of our region flooded. And so that pushed the agenda to really adapt the river there, the situation. So it was also a little bit more reactive, but I would say overall, when it comes to water management, the Netherlands are pretty far ahead, future-proofing the country. When it comes to, let's say, spatial adaptation, also soil management, soil quality, that's something where I think we are still, let's say, not as far, I would say, compared to flood protection and high rising water levels. So there, I think it can still be a little bit more, should become a little bit more systemic when it comes to that. And as you see recently with the whole nitrogen discussion we're having in the Netherlands, well, basically that's something we've known for 15 to 20 years now. And the way, that's personal opinion, the national government is now communicating about the way we want to reduce nitrogen, also as part of course, mitigation and reducing carbon. And that's something where I think, okay, that's something we saw coming in the Netherlands in the last decades now. So so there I think we should be a little bit critical about ourselves when we say, okay, we have these kinds of large long-term programs, but in some sectoral approaches we're not yet there where we need to be. But it's partly my personal experience there. So based on what we saw the last weeks happening with the protests in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Tom. I'm hearing that some people may have issues accessing the chat. So in case that this is the case, please just raise your hand and we can also give you the speech. So yeah, for the next couple of minutes, please do so. Christian, over to you.
Yeah, just want to second what Tom said. Really, a long-term strategy and multi-annual work programs, committees, vertical integration. All this is no guarantee that like some sector just doesn't do their homework and just swims along, goes to the meetings, but doesn't do anything. And in Germany, we see what. We really see a deficit in integrating climate change adaptation into energy policies. Johannes mentioned earlier the National Energy and Climate Plans, NECP, where really the requirement is for the member states to report about their mitigation efforts, but to show how the mitigation efforts really are climate proofed. And even though Germany did all these things that I presented earlier in the NECP, I think climate change impacts were not, or adaptation were not mentioned at all, because the energy work stream runs in a different, or used to run in a different ministry, and they weren't really closely engaged with the ministry who was leading the adaptation work on a national level. So it just was disregarded, which is a pity, which I hope and I think will change. But I think it shows that really there's a lot of room for improvement.
Okay, thank you. I see a hand, Chrissy. If someone can unmute, please, Chrissy, so she can pose the question.
Yes, you should be unmuted. You should be unmuted, Chrissy. Can you speak?
All right, so you give me the right to unmute myself, huh? Okay, just
yes,
one.
We can hear you now.
All right, okay. I'm trying to make my camera work, maybe. Okay, it doesn't seem to be working. All right, so I guess for me, I get more and more disappointed. I mean, today, it's not a good day for me, because I mean, there is so much to be done. And we have, you know, the geopolitical scene really has hampered everything. You know, there was all these, I see the Greek regions and cities, you know, signing on and stuff, but will they achieve something? I don't know. It's just so difficult. And now with the war in Ukraine, I mean, I see we're going through a very deep crisis again, financial for the households. The priorities change. We go back to coal. So it is really a complex issue. Really, for me, the biggest effort should be on capacity building. I think as societies, we really are very far behind in that. I mean, I heard also Branka for, you know, for Croatia, but also for Greece. I think the priorities are not there. You know, the actions that are planned are not really, you know, efficient enough to do this. So I think we should invest a lot. And of course, what the Commission is doing with the missions is really great. And, you know, I think it will make a, yeah, so now you see me through the other camera. But anyway, so I think it will make a dent into this. But we really need to invest in capacity building. You know, people should stop seeing this as an extra expense. I think people should start seeing it as a vital need now. You know, it is becoming, time is flying and things are happening and it's all against us. So it really, it is very frustrating, really. So we need to really, this is in a sense good for us. It's work for us to really go at it and try the best we can, you know, pour the money in the right direction and be effective. You know, it wasn't very constructive what I said, but.
No, thanks a lot, actually. And I think it's also like quite, it's important, like I can only second that we need to put more effort on capacity building. I would say also like more increasing, let's say, support on cross member states effort and support on climate resilience and preparedness, on scaling up, of course, like the financing to build climate resilience, and more like engagement and exchanges between like the member states and between now also like the regions and communities. Thus to follow also like what actually the adaptation mission is talking about. I would like to thank all the speakers for their contributions. It was, I think, was quite an interesting session. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for your presentations and for your input. And I'm sure that we're going to have also more opportunities to collaborate in the future. Just to say also one last thing, we have I have also like seen during the different presentations there were some discussions in the chat about the mission missions and how actually they can be integrated. And of course, the Commission came out with like all like this like number of missions there with a number of activities and different calls now, different programs. So I think something that we have already discussed with our colleagues in the Resilience project is that in autumn, when we will know basically which are the projects that will be funded under the first mission calls, we would definitely do another workshop, including like the 4 projects: Arsinoe, Transformare, Impetus, and Resilience, and basically to help the projects and the participants, but also like further regions that will be invited to understand, on the one hand, how the different missions interplay, how especially the mission on cities and the mission on adaptation can work together, and basically put like the pieces together. So we will keep you informed about this opportunity, and we hope that we will see you there. But for now, thanks a lot. Thanks again to all our speakers, and there will be recording available. So and have a good day.
Thanks, Vasileios.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.